Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. Fire and Ice by Robert Frost.
My name is Dr. Katie Mack. I am a theoretical astrophysicist and author, and I'm very happy to be on the Bonn Park podcast with Sara and Marshall today.
Welcome to Bonn Park.
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 Can you do us a favor?
Can you please leave us a 5-star review, like or subscribe to our show, and share with your friends? We'd also love it if you followed us on social media.
We are a homegrown community project, and every bit helps. On with the show, this is it.
KW Telescope is supported by Bonn Park. Have you ever seen the rings of Saturn? Have you examined the craters of the lunar surface? If you want to explore space from your own backyard, KW Telescope has something for every level of DIY astronomy. They've got telescopes from all the best makers, and their knowledgeable staff can help set any rookie astronomer on their way to the stars. Find KW Telescope at 25 Manitou Drive in Kitchener and online at kwtelescope.com. The wonders of the universe await.
In celebration of Women's History Month and women's achievements and contributions to Waterloo region, Bonn Park is supported by the St. Jacob's Farmers Market. The market is a community landmark of more than half a century and is the largest year-round farmers market in Canada. Whatever you crave, you'll find it there. There's country classics like fresh apple fritters, cinnamon rolls, and Oktoberfest sausage on a bun. And new favorites like corn-wrapped vegan tamales, Greek gyros, and blooming onions. With almost 300 food and artisan vendors on site, there's something for everyone, and it makes for a great day trip with family or friends. The St. Jacob's Market is open Thursdays and Saturdays and Tuesdays during the summer. Stay up to date on hours and events by following the St. Jacob's Farmers Market on Facebook, Instagram, or at stjacobsmarket.com. Here's a message from Summer and Hannah. 1, 2, 3.
Bonn Park is supported by Gifted in Belmont Village. Gifted has some of the quirkiest, funkiest, and coolest gifts you'll find anywhere, like tea infusers, mugs, cozy reading socks, plant pots, cushions, and throw blankets, along with amazing puzzles and games. Want the perfect gift for that hard to buy for special someone? Whether you're looking for something nerdy, literary, cute, funny, bizarre, local, nostalgic, or unexpected, Gifted has it.
Among all the unique items from around the world are amazing creations by local artists, along with the one-of-a-kind greeting cards. You're bound to find what you're looking for, even if you have no idea what you're looking for, at Gifted.
Shop online at
giftedwaterloo.com
and check them out on Facebook and Instagram.
Dr. Mack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We are very excited to talk to you.
I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to meet more people in what will soon be my new home.
Yeah, that's right. You're going to be joining the Perimeter Institute in June of 2022 as the Hawking Chair in Cosmology and Science Communication.
Yes.
So what I found out is that this role is about cosmology research, but also engagement work and outreach to bring physics to the public, to people like us.
Yeah. So it's kind of a joint position between the research side of the Institute and the outreach side. So Perimeter has sort of formally 3 different branches, really, within its mission. There's the research, the outreach, and then teaching of some kind, various aspects of that. And so I will be connected in some ways to all 3, but primarily I will be doing my research in the cosmology group with the other researchers, just the faculty there. And then I'll also be spending part of my time working with the outreach people to do various events, to put together media things, to talk to reporters about what the latest physics news is, to write for the magazine, to all those kinds of things. I'll be sort of a conduit between the research side and the public.
Marshall and I have listened to your book, The End of Everything, in parentheses, Astrophysically Speaking. Mm-hmm. When listening to the book's opening, you're quoting Robert Frost, and I'm just wondering if you're like a huge Twilight fan. As you know, in the Twilight saga, Eclipse opens with Bella reciting piece of Robert Frost to Edward in the field with the lavender.
Yeah, yes. No, it does. And I actually rewatched Eclipse a few months ago and noticed that, and I was like, oh, we had a similar thought there.
I think you're just reaching a new audience. You're tapping into that audience.
Well, I have read all of the Twilight books. I have watched all of the movies more than once.
Same.
I didn't mean to get into that series. It was totally an accident. And I just got totally like hooked on it. There's something about that series, and there are a lot of things I do not like about it. There's a whole lot of weird messages about relationships and stuff like that I just think are gross. But at the same time, something about that book really like gripped me, and in terms of like they did a really good job. The author did a really good job of capturing some of the feelings of being an adolescent girl who is insecure and trying to find her place in the world, and it like just reached into my childhood and pulled that out, and so I totally got hooked on it. So I don't know if I would call myself a fan of the series per se, because I do think there are things about it that are problematic, but it is something that did sort of capture part of my adolescent soul at some point.
I do think there's a little bit of Bella in all of us, but I need to know, Team Edward or Team Jacob?
They're both terrible for her. I mean,
Team Bella then. You're Team Bella.
Like Edward is sort of borderline abusive in terms of his controllingness, totally. and then Jacob like assaults her. Like it's not neither of these people are good people for anyway, I don't want to get into it, but
Speaking of books, listen to your book. I was really trying to figure out for myself, who's loved astronomy my whole life, what the first book was I had, my introduction to astronomy, and it was, my father had these books, like big, chunky books with lots of illustrations in them. So the one was just called Solar System. But the first book I actually remember somebody bought for me, my mother, was called The Young Astronomer. And it had lots of great tips for basically getting a telescope and finding Jupiter and seeing its moons or the rings of Saturn.
Yeah.
Is there a book from your childhood or teenage years that you can kind of point your finger to and say, wow, I guess that was really my introduction to the universe, and the mysteries of it all?
I mean, so I read A Brief History of Time when I was a kid. I was probably about 10 years old, and at the time there was a lot of it that I did not absorb, that was over my head, but I was fascinated by those ideas. That there was also a book called About Time by Paul Davies. It was all about things like time travel and that sort of thing, and there were a few other books that I sort of dipped into about black holes and such. I think A Brief History of Time was probably the one that had the biggest impact on me in terms of thinking about like what I find exciting to think about, what kinds of concepts I really love to dig into, and I read a lot of stuff about Stephen Hawking. I saw like a documentary about him, and that. In that kind of, I realized when I was reading all that there's a job you can do called a cosmologist, right? You can be a cosmologist. A cosmologist is a person who studies the cosmos and gets to think about space-time and the Big Bang and black holes and things like that all day. And I thought, okay, that's obviously what I should do with my life. I want to be a cosmologist. I want to have the job Stephen Hawking has. And then that just kind of set the stage for my career. I went to college, studied physics, went to grad school, did astrophysics, and got into cosmology research. So it definitely, I think that book and others like it definitely had a big impact on how I thought about careers, how I thought about the universe, what I wanted to do with my life.
So I'm 45 years old, and I have not made it through A Brief History of Time yet. I own that book, and I get into it every couple years, and then I think, okay, maybe we'll save this chapter for another time.
Yeah,
that's how far it reaches. In the book, though, you are so great at giving us a literary or poetic or philosophical piece of information or quotation to draw us in with something we've already heard before, we already know, we've already pondered, and then you get into the heavy topics. And this is a beautiful way for somebody like myself, like Marshall already is into astronomy and has studied over his life for your own interest. But for myself, I know what the average Joe sort of knows, right? But this is a way to pull someone like me in to say, okay, I think I know where we're going here. I'll keep listening. I'll keep seeing what this message is. And even from the onset when we were talking about Robert Frost, some say the world will end in fire, some say ice. Now you say this has been argued for centuries, and the answer is...
It's fire. The world will end in fire. The world will be destroyed by the sun. Depending on what you mean by destroyed, either in a billion years when the oceans boil off, or several billion years when it sort of spirals into the sun and is devoured. But yeah, in terms of the world ending, it's definitely fire. There's a sort of slight chance that when the sun evolves after the oceans have boiled off, there could be a gravitational instability where the Earth sort of moves out in the solar system a little bit, but I think the consensus is that it'll definitely be baked before anything else happens. And so I think if you're talking about the world ending, it will end in fire. I think that is pretty indisputable at this point.
I think you said something like we'll be like a crusted ball of charred magma rock, and that'll just dissipate into the the word I think was the churning atmosphere of the dying star, which is the sun. It's so hopeful stuff. So something to just keep us going. And this is where I really appreciate the philosophical nature of the book as well, and how you dive into concepts like religion and just saying we can't think of one without the others, sort of to keep us stable. So why does it all matter? Why do we keep moving forward?
I think that in terms of why do we continue existing even though the world will end? Is that the?
I guess.
Well, I mean, that's a kind of hard question. I mean, we keep existing even though we will die. Each of us is going to die someday, and we usually try not to think about that. But it is a fact of existence that we will die. But we find ways to make life meaningful anyway. We find ways to carry on, and we decide that living is still a good thing and an important thing, even though it's not eternal. I think that it's a little bit harder with the universe ending, or with Earth ending, with the universe ending, because some of the justifications, some of the rationalizations we use for being okay with personal death don't really apply when you get to the death of the species or the death of the universe as a whole. Because, a lot of times when you ask someone about oh, you're going to die, how do you feel about that? They'll say something like, well, I'll feel like, I've left my mark on humanity, or like my children will carry on beyond me, or, I will, my great works will influence the future. It's like something like that. People find ways to say, well, something about me will live on. Somehow I will have affected the world, and that'll carry on into the future. And if the entire universe is ending, then you can't use that argument anymore, because nothing will continue into the future. There's no, at some point it will not have mattered that we existed. And so I think that brings about this other challenge of how do you find meaning, how do you find purpose when you know that everything will end, and that at some point, there will be a time when looking back it will not have mattered that you existed. And I think that is a challenge, and that's something that I kind of struggled through as I was writing the book, and I kind of talk through it at various points in the book, this idea of how do you find meaning in a doomed universe? And I think you can. I think you have to. I think that you have to find ways for life to be meaningful in the moment. That does things that don't rely on some future looking back justification. And I think that is possible, and I think that is necessary if you want to really put yourself in the context of the continuation of reality as we know it. But I don't think it's a trivial, obvious thing. I think that's something that takes some wrestling with.
I think your book gives perspective to like a simple little things we say, like don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah. No, that's definitely something that I felt when I was writing it as well. Like, spending all my time thinking about the ultimate destruction of reality, little inconveniences take on a different character in that perspective, for sure.
I've talked to Marshall about this a lot. I find a lot of comfort in the hugeness of it doesn't matter, right? So why don't we make it the best that we can? So, of course, me, so optimistic and cheery, I think, why can't everyone think this way? This is the answer to world hunger and war and religious divide and, political divide and all these things that the world is facing. I think, why can't we all think this way? It does help me, almost like a religion, to think, well, this is just my tiny little ride here and that's it.
Yeah, I mean that was something that Carl Sagan talked about, with this the pale blue dot image, right? So there's this famous picture of the Earth from millions of miles away, maybe billions, I'm not sure the number exactly, looking back from the Voyager spacecraft as it's leaving the solar system, looking back toward the sun, looking back toward the Earth, and Earth shows up as a little, couple of pixels of sort of light blue in this picture, and he has this wonderful speech about this pale blue dot, this image of Earth from so far away, and how from that perspective, nations don't matter, wars and kingdoms and political divisions don't matter. You just have this image of, we are just on this tiny little dot together. And he says something about how that might inspire us to deal more kindly with one another, which I think is a wonderful phrase. And it kind of also connects to this idea of the overview effect that supposedly when you're an astronaut and you go out into space and you see the Earth from space, you get this perspective of like, oh, everybody's all connected. We're all just kind of together on this little rock in the void, and we need to find that connection with each other. And I think that those kinds of examples really make me feel that communicating about astronomy, about cosmology, about our cosmic story, about where we are in the universe, can help people to get a little bit of that perspective, and can help people to see the connections that we have, the fragility of life on Earth, and how that should inspire us to take more care and to care about each other and to see our connections amongst ourselves. So it is something that I think about a lot, and I consciously try to evoke that feeling of we are just all together on this little speck of dust, and we're probably doomed one way or another, and we should be nice to each other while we're here. We should take some care and be thoughtful about our existence.
How are you feeling about coming to Waterloo and that being your place where you're going to be at this point in your career? You just wrote a book.
I'm excited about it. I did spend quite a bit of time in Waterloo in 2020. So I went to Perimeter for a visiting fellowship starting in January 2020. It was a 6-month fellowship, and the idea was that I would spend 6 months there working with people and collaborating on research. As it happened, within a couple of months, the whole institute was closed and everything was online, and I was just sort of sitting around in the visitor apartment for 4 or 5 months by myself. I got a foster cat at some point to keep me company, but it was not sort of the most expansive sort of introduction to living in Waterloo. But I really liked the place. When everything was open, it was I had a really nice time checking out the coffee shops and cafes and getting to know the parks and the just the neighborhoods and connecting with people. And I went into Toronto a few times and really enjoyed being able to do that. And I got a really nice perspective on it. It felt like a great place to be. And then when the pandemic was, got started and everything was shut, like I really got to know the parks and the running trails, because that was all I could do. So it really felt to me like a place that could be a nice home. So I'm very excited about moving to Waterloo. I think it'll be great, and I'm looking forward to moving to Canada and getting that whole different perspective as well.
We'll have to join you at one of those favorite coffee shops.
Yeah.
If it's, we'll see what's out. I think one of my favorites turned into a ramen place, and I want to check that out too.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was talking to Sara about how I said, I wonder if someone like Dr. Mack, it's kind of like the brain chemistry changes when you work in the field that you do and you write the kind of book that you do. What I'm talking about is, everybody enjoys the feeling of the warmth of the sun on their face at different times of the year, especially if you haven't felt it for a while or it's summertime, a beautiful day. And for me, when I walk around my neighborhood, sometimes I go a little bit further with it, where I think about the sun as a star, that I really think about that's what I'm feeling, is this heat coming off a star. And I think about the life of that sun, and I think about the times I've seen the sun through a white light solar filter in a telescope or a hydrogen alpha telescope.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's what it's called, to see solar flares and sunspots. So I can take time, even I can go further with thinking about it. But in the case of you, do you find yourself, spending great amounts of time just on an ordinary day thinking about that sun up there in the sky or the moon?
And it's not constant, but yeah, I mean, I think about where we are in the universe and how we're moving through it, and things like the seasons and what that means for where I am on the Earth and how it's tilted toward or away from the sun at any given moment, and how that works sort of physically. It's something that I thought a lot more about when I was teaching introductory astronomy, actually, because I was having to explain, the phases of the moon and stuff like that. But yeah, there are moments for sure when that perspective really comes up. Like when you look through a small telescope and you see the moons of Jupiter or the rings of Saturn or something, and just like a small telescope that's not sort of super electronic, you don't have like the LED display or something, you're just looking through lenses and mirrors, and it's just the light coming from the thing into your eye. I think a lot about that bit of light. It left the sun 3 hours ago or something, bounced off of a moon of Jupiter in the outer solar system, and then came all the way back to my eye through this telescope. That photon has done this journey from the sun out to the outer solar system, back into the inner solar system, through the atmosphere, into my eye. That's what that photon did, and that is mind-blowing sometimes when I think about that. And when I think about how the light from the sun was produced, you have these nuclear reactions in the center of the sun, and it can take 10,000 years 100,000 years for the light to make it through the layers of the sun and bouncing around and being absorbed and re-emitted as it goes through this super dense plasma, and then it gets the outer layers of the sun, and then it takes 8 minutes to get to the Earth. Like that process is really fascinating to think about. I mean, there's those kinds of things that do change your perspective. And also just weird stuff like relativity. There's this idea of space and time being connected. The way you move through space affects how you move through time and stuff like that. And when you're studying that, you think about things in terms of these space-time diagrams where, space and time are different kinds of dimensions in this larger space-time. And so as you're moving through the world, you're moving through space and you're moving through time. And so you're sort of creating these trails through space and time in complicated ways. And I think about that a lot in terms of like where I am right now. I'm creating like a path through time, even as I'm just sitting still, and the Earth is creating a path through space as I'm sitting on it, and that just trying to conceptualize that sort of higher dimensional way of thinking about space and time. I get like stuck on those kinds of tangents a lot. It's just a really weird mindset to be in, but like if you're crossing the street and you're thinking about like a car goes by and then you walk across the street and then another car goes by, in sort of a space and time diagram, you kind of figure out like where like that car was in the same space but in a different time, and then I'm in a different time but same different space. It's just you kind of conceptualize it differently. I don't know if any of that makes sense, but it gets very complicated.
The street and the cars helped me a little.
Yeah. Yeah.
You must have realized early on when you figured out the path you wanted to take, that math was going to be a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I guess it's always going to be a big part of your life.
It's a small part of our lives.
Very small. So when you're a cosmologist, you realize early on, okay, this is going to be a big part of my understanding and grasp of things, and how I'm going to learn and understand how everything works. And I guess it's always going to be intertwined with your work. Is that right?
Yeah. No, a ton of my work is math, for sure.
Yeah, so when I went to Wilfrid Laurier University to do a fine arts degree, so that's painting and drawing and sculpture, I saw there was a course called Astrophysics and Space Science by Dr. Raymond Koenig, and I thought, wow, I would love to take that, right? And I went to a counselor, and it wasn't quite in line with what I was doing academically. And the counselor said, "Well, why don't you go talk to Dr. Koenig about it and see if that's going to work for you?" I did, and Dr. Koenig explained, "Where are you at with math in high school?" And I said, "Well, I failed grade 9 math and had to do it again, and I failed grade 10 math and had to do it again." He said, "Okay," but I really, really wanted to take this course, and I'm so glad I did. And there were moments where I was like, these wow moments where you realize how you can calculate the distance and mass of things, and once you realize it makes sense, it's perfect.
Yeah.
But when it comes time to do it on an exam, that's where I fell short, because I just didn't have the background. But anyways, I love the course. I realized, I was telling Sarah that that's where I guess that's where it stops it right there for me. I realized I can't really proceed further because I haven't done the work.
It's interesting. I hear a lot from people who say that they love astronomy, they love physics, but they just can't do math. Like, they're just not math people. And I'm always a little bit uncertain about what that really means, because I think that a lot of people, like the way that we talk about math in school, in our society, there's this real sort of this stereotype, I guess, about like there's math people and then there's not math people, and like these are different kinds of people with different kinds of brains, and if you find out that you're a not math person, then you're never going to be a math person, and like you can't. There's this divide, and I think that's usually not true. I mean, I know that there are certain disabilities where people have true confusion about numbers in general, in the way that some people can have an issue where they have trouble with words or whatever. People can have trouble with numbers, but I think for the most part, like the way that math is taught in school is not done in a way that's always very accessible to everyone, and so people who don't learn easily through the sort of standard methods might feel like it's the math they don't get rather than that method of teaching math that they don't get. And I think that a lot of people have a lot of anxiety around math, and they look at something and it doesn't make sense right away, and they sort of step back and get nervous about it and say, well, obviously I can't do that. And I think that for most people, learning math is like learning a language, where you practice with it a lot, you get immersed in it, you use it in different contexts, you build on what you know, you spend a lot of time sort of deep into it, and the more you practice it, the more you learn it in different contexts, the more that you get immersed, the easier it becomes. It's just you learn it through practice the way that you learn anything through practice. And there's nothing special or magic about math being, requiring a particular kind of brain. So I think that, when I talk to kids, for example, who are just struggling with math in school, or they're just getting toward college and they're not sure if they're going to be able to do physics or something because they've struggled with math, I say, look, it doesn't have to be easy to be something that you will excel at in the future. Just because you're finding it hard now, like I found it hard at various times. I was never a sort of savant where I would just walk into a room and multiply 3-digit numbers together in my head. Like I was not that kind of person. I didn't have that sort of natural, like immediate aptitude. I worked really hard. I spent a lot of time on it because it was something I was passionate about, and I wanted to learn it, and I wanted to be able to use mathematics in my work. And I took a lot of classes. I did a lot of practice. When the classes I took in high school were not great math classes. I had a kind of the program in high school wasn't great, and so when I got to Caltech for college to do my physics degree, I was put in the kind of like remedial math class in Caltech. I was in they had this math course, Math 1A was what all the first year students were put into, and then they had a special section called Math 0.9. I was in Math 0.9 when I first got to Caltech. It was not, it was the kind of like, okay, let's get, review. And throughout college, I struggled with getting my exams done within the allotted time because I would have to kind of start from the beginning on the math. I didn't have those facts in my head that a lot of my fellow students did, and so I really struggled through it. But I worked on it and I got better at it, and even now I don't feel like I'm the best in the room at the mathematics when I talk to my colleagues, but I can sit down and I can work it out and I can get there because I'm interested in the subject. And so I think that, I would encourage anybody who's interested in getting into science, getting into physics or any other area of science, the math being hard is not a sign that you shouldn't do it, right? If I had this idea that like, because this math is hard, I shouldn't be a physicist, then I wouldn't have gotten where I am. It was hard, and physics is hard, and all of this, astrophysics is hard. These things are hard, but not being a natural is not a reason to give up. And I see too many people really write themselves off and just like count themselves out. And I think that if you really are excited about a subject, the fact that math is hard should not be a barrier, and because it will get easier, you will get better at it, and even if you have to work hard at it all the time, like it's you can get there. So that's my soapbox about mathematics.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I mean, that's inspiring to me, and I'm sure it will be for our listeners as well. I mean, I do write myself off as not being a math person all the time, especially because I worked in civil engineering for years and years, but I understand like spatial and visual math concepts if I can make them make sense. Yeah. But pencil on paper, I might as well be scribbling. That would probably be where I'm writing myself off, and maybe the pencil to paper would take practice for me to get there, but it's not something I'm passionate about. Right. I remember my grade 8 teacher recognizing that I was not where the rest of the students should be and kept me after school and ripped up pieces of paper to explain multiplication and division to me. And as soon as I saw these ripped up pieces of paper, I was like, oh, it's just groups of stuff.
Yeah.
You just mix them up. This makes so much sense to me now. And that had never been explained to me visually before. And I know school does, especially here in Ontario, the curriculum for kids has a lot more visual math in it. But I think there are just so many different ways to explain it, and thank you for sharing that part of your story with us. And again, this is where your book speaks to the regular person, and this is why I'm so passionate about it. You've got dark humor in there. There's a metaphor where you're explaining the expansion of the universe as though you're holding a slinky, and how you would hold that slinky and what you would do with it. I was like, oh, this is so cool, but it's also scary. And then there's a portion where you're like, let's start with like a quick catch up on the universe. Okay, let's get you up to speed on where the universe is at. And then we'll talk about the destruction. But let's just catch up to where we're at now. So I really appreciate and love that part. So now I'm going to ask you a very pointed question where I got lost.
Okay.
Why is the Higgs field the holy grail of, is it particle physics?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah. So the Higgs stuff is, to be clear, the most difficult part of all of it to explain, in the sense that, like, it is real technical. It gets real technical real fast with the Higgs field. And when I give talks about the end of the universe, I talk about vacuum decay, which is one of the ultimate destruction possibilities, and it's very, very connected to the Higgs field and what the Higgs field is doing. And I always worry when I get to that part of a talk that I'm going to lose everybody completely, and they're just going to be like, "What are you talking about? This is nonsense." So the Higgs field is an energy field that is pervading all of space, and there's this idea that particles that have mass are interacting with the Higgs field all the time, and the more they interact with the Higgs field, the more massive they are, right? In the sense of, like, that's connected to what it means to have mass if you're a particle, if you're like an electron or a proton or whatever. There's some interaction with the Higgs field. Protons are made of smaller particles. They're not fundamental particles. They're made of quarks, which are this other kind of particle. So there's a caveat there. But the reason that the Higgs field is really, really important to thinking about particle physics is that it's connected to, like, how the conditions for the universe got set up in the early universe. So the Higgs field is this energy field. It has some kind of, like, energy associated with it, has some kind of value associated with it. And that the Higgs field was in a different state in the very early universe. It had a different energy associated with it. So you can think about it, you can imagine it like a temperature in a room, right? Okay, so you can have, in every part of the room, you can measure the temperature at that point, and there you get a number, right? So if you're in a warm room, you get a number, and it's a high number at all times. If you're in a cold room, you measure the temperature everywhere, you get a low number. And you can imagine that conditions change, and so that temperature field will change, like if you make the room hotter or make the room colder. And so the Higgs field is it's called a scalar field, which just means it's something that has a value at every point in space. And in the early universe, that value was different than it is now. So there was sort of a different amount of Higgsness in every point in space in the early universe than now. And that transition that happened in the very early universe, where it went from being in one state to being in another, that sort of set up how all the particles interact with each other, what fundamental interactions in physics exists, like the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force and electromagnetic force, like all of that, the ways that particles can interact with each other, the forces of nature got kind of organized when the Higgs field changed in the very, very early universe. And so that set the conditions for how physics works at a subatomic scale everywhere in the universe from then on. So the reason that's an important thing to understand is that, like, if you're a physicist, you want to know why we have the particles we have, why they interact with each other the way that they do. And so the Higgs mechanism, that shift, was a really, really important part of that question. And the way it connects to the end of the universe is that it seems there's a possibility that the Higgs field could change again in the future. And if that happened, it would change again how subatomic physics works and how atoms fit together and how chemistry happens, because it would change all the forces of nature, and that would destroy the universe. So we kind of don't want that to happen. The kinds of advances in terms of what we know about the universe and what we're learning about the universe, both with observations and with theoretical advances, that is mind-blowing. I mean, we have so much data right now, and we're getting so much more data. We have a bunch of telescopes that are just about to start taking data. There's the James Webb Space Telescope, which was launched on Christmas, and that's heading out into space to look at some of the earliest galaxies that ever formed in the universe, and that's going to tell us incredible things about the what set the conditions for the universe in terms of the formation of stars and galaxies in the very, very beginning. It's also going to look at the atmospheres of planets around other stars and maybe tell us if they have life on them or not, which is fascinating in a totally different direction. But then there's also a bunch of ground-based telescopes that are doing surveys of the universe, going to see billions of galaxies, millions of supernovae, and really map out the cosmos in that way. And then we have gravitational waves, so we're able to actually feel the vibrations of space and time as gravity moves through the universe. That's fascinating. So we've been able to detect the collisions of black holes in other galaxies through the way that they cause ripples through space-time. I mean, that's incredible. We have instruments to measure that stuff now. And then, as you said, the picture of the black hole, or where what we're doing there was using a bunch of telescopes all around the Earth to work together to get the closest up view of a supermassive black hole that's ever been done, and really see where the event horizon is and how the light is being kind of pulled out of the universe in that black hole. I mean, it's fascinating. It's astonishing stuff. And then on the theory side, we're learning about how physics works at the fundamental level and how that connects to the universe as a whole, and that's amazing too. So, there are people at the Perimeter Institute that are connected with all of those projects in one way or another, and finding new ways to learn about the universe through analyzing data or through theoretical advances in studying how physics works at a fundamental level, and also how cosmology works, like how the buildup of matter over time in the universe works. So it's certainly a very, very exciting place to be, and I've definitely found when I'm at the Institute and having conversations with people, it's just very, very stimulating to be talking to people who are really on the cutting edge of all of those questions.
Bonn Park is made possible with the support of the Kitchener Public Library and the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation.
Our show is produced by Sarah Geidlinger
And Marshall Ward.
with audio engineering by Sarah Geidlinger.
Bonn Park's original music is by Alan Lung.